Hi everybody, thank you for coming back to my channel. Today I'd like to share with you a conversation I had with my cousin-in-law, Grace Tien. She is a PhD sociologist. She has done research in China, and we also talk about race and activism and equality in the US. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you haven't done so already, hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. Some of you has asked about an interview with me. Once I have 100 subscribers, I'd like to celebrate by sharing an interview that my good friend Mary Beth did with me. So it's my turn to answer the question. So please help me by getting to 100 subscribers. And without further ado, let's get to the interview. So hi, Grace. Thank you so much for spending time with me and chatting with me. And like it's so cool. Like I just feel very fortunate to know you through my husband, right? Like we're like technically, I don't know.
We're family.
Well, I don't know if it's called like second cousin. I have no idea what it's called.
Yeah, well,
Um,
cousin-in-law, right?
yes, we're cousin-in-law. So I'm very excited.
Yeah.
Can you first like talk a little bit about like how you grew up? Like, were you born in New Jersey?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me today. I'm really excited that we can just like chat and talk like this too. I know prior we were just saying like, yeah, I was just saying like, wow, there's like so many cool things Jen has done. Like she's done everything. So anyway, I'm excited to talk to you today. And yeah, as to like where I grew up and where I was born, I'm like thoroughly a New Jersey native. I was born in New Brunswick, New Jersey. So, and yeah, I grew up in Hillsborough, New Jersey for pretty much all my life. And then like K through 12 was all Hillsborough, New Jersey. And then I was in the Boston area. I was at Wellesley for undergrad, the women's college. Um, and then after that, I taught in inner city Baltimore.
Mhm.
Um, and before returning to New Jersey at in Princeton, New Jersey for graduate school. So I to be honest, I didn't expect to come back to New Jersey, but I did, and that's where that's kind of where I began like sociology and the PhD. But I'm kind of jumping ahead. I think you
That
wanted
was
me
a
to
very
speak.
quick.
Sorry,
No, that's okay. That's fine.
that
That's
was a
a good
very sorry.
overview.
That was like I'm giving the skeletal overview. Yeah, and then yeah, I can back up. So do you want me to talk? I can talk a little bit more about like stories from childhood or what it was like growing up in New Jersey.
Yeah, I'm kind
Do
of
you want me to say?
curious because, like, I'm
Yeah,
like first generation immigrant, right? So I came to the US
yeah,
when I was 9, and that was like I guess, difficult transition, but also I think good in many ways. But I'm
yeah,
always curious, as an Asian American, right? Like,
yeah,
first,
yeah,
like, I don't know, I guess it's second generation, you would,
yeah,
technically be second generation. What were like, did you have a lot of Asians around, like, as you grew up? Like, did you have
right,
this identity because now like my kids are born here and they identify
yeah,
more as an American than Chinese American
yeah,
or Asian,
for sure,
but then they're young, like, they're not really like clear,
right,
exactly. But
yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
curious, as you were growing, what was your identity like? And did you have that period where you were searching or, like to kind of reconcile the different cultures?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, um, I can say this, like I grew up, I joke with people that where I grew up, Hillsborough is kind of like this farm town. It's, I remember like seeing a lot of cows around me when I was growing up as a kid. And those fields with cows slowly turned into strip malls, and that's where New Jersey got its reputation as like a line of strip malls. but
Those cows in
but
between.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But there are parts of New Jersey that are super beautiful and like are very much still deserving of its nickname as, the Garden State, right? But yeah, New Jersey where I grew up was definitely not very diverse. I was probably usually the only Asian kid in my class, like at school, in elementary school. In high school, I remember in my graduating class, like my senior graduating class, I was probably one of like under 10 East Asian kids in my graduating class of like over 600 kids. So it
Oh,
was a very, yeah, so it was a very, very small handful of Asian American, but Asian American covers a lot. So like if we talk about like the whole AAPI, then that's probably like definitely more than 10. But like if I was just to say like ABC, like, you know, Taiwanese, Chinese American, then yeah, that's like a much, much smaller number. And um, yeah, I think in terms of my own identity, mm, I will say this. I feel like pretty early on in my life, and I think this is something actually that really shaped me and made me very sensitive to just people who are excluded in general. Because I think having experienced like exclusion or discrimination like very early, this is like when I was like 4 years old,
mm,
it was like in a preschool. But I think that experience like definitely made me very sensitive to people who are like, outside of a group or you know, who have not felt included. So I think on one hand, while that was a very that I have to say, like, I feel like that was a bit of a trauma for me like when in childhood. But on the other hand, I think it also made me more compassionate. I think it just made me really sensitive to people who are like, not given a seat at the table, you know. So so I think in that sense, like I can argue like, good things can still come out of like, terrible things that have happened.
mm,
Um, but yeah, I think in terms of that identity, that was something I was aware of, like when I was growing up, that there was some difference. But on the other hand, I think I also, I think I also just, embraced some of this difference. I think, and I think another part of my identity that played a significant role is, if anything, I think my faith played a really significant role in shaping my identity as
mm.
a person, so um yeah, so that definitely has been a really big part of my life, like from when I was young up to this point. I think it still is a really big part of my life. And yeah, I think having that faith piece, if anything, I think sometimes even superseded the racial piece for me in some ways.
Mhm.
But it's not that I didn't grapple. Like I think in later parts of life, I did think about these things more and I grappled more with it. Um, and I, yeah, I recognize that, and especially as a sociologist, when you're trained to see through these lens of, um, different lens of like race and analyzing things through like the lens of race, gender, class, for example, like these are things that naturally you also like just kind of become more attuned to. So yeah, so I think in terms of identity, that was something I would say was on my mind like later. I think the racial part kind of came in, the race part of my identity definitely came in further, like later on in my life. I think the faith part of my identity probably played a bigger role in the first, like I would say like 18 years or so. But
Oh, interesting. It's amazing to hear that even like you have memories of when you're 4. That's just a- amazing to me.
yeah,
I remember
yeah, it
when I
was.
was 4.
Yeah, yeah. I think because yeah, I do have some memories of like childhood and like from younger age. Um yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think those are some of the things that I think certain things, especially if they made an impression on you, like they do stay with you. Like
Yeah,
good or bad, right? They
absolutely.
do stay with
Like
you.
if it's trauma.
Yeah, yeah.
But I
I
agree
think it
with you.
was.
Like, I think for me, it's the same way. Like, I definitely felt like the outsider in many different instances in my life as well. And I
Yeah.
do think that to some extent, like you said, like it really shaped me, like as a person, like in terms of how to be inclusive, right? Like, I think sometimes it's like, yeah, it's like we want to tolerate, everybody, but that's not the same as actually actively including people, right?
I really like that. I think that's so true. I think what you said is really wise and is really insightful. It's a great distinction to make between like Yeah, like there's a big difference between tolerance, versus like active inclusion. Yeah, so I really like that. I agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
Um,
So why sociology? Like, did you know, were you studying sociology since undergrad? Like, did you know that's what you wanted to do? Or, because I know, we talked about this earlier, it's like, I still don't really know what sociology is. So, like, to me, it's a bit
yeah,
hard to imagine, being in high school. It's like, I want to be a sociologist. Like, can you kind of
right.
lead us through, like, how that came about?
Yeah, actually, so it's really funny because I think naturally I am one of those people that tends to like plan things out for like many, many years ahead in my life. But with sociology, I never did. It totally was something that just like I stumbled into. I completely stumbled into. So I would say like early on, probably in junior high or senior high, I really thought like, okay, law school is going to be my post college like next step.
Mm.
And even when I was teaching in Baltimore at the time, I was still considering law school. And I think the reason for this is because I've always had a sense of like calling, perhaps I would say, to public, like just like public service. I think that really has always been my lifelong passion. And when I think about how I got into sociology, I guess looking at like my lifelong interest and passion in public service, I don't think sociology is like too far off in some ways, like from that, because sociology is the study of society, right? It's the study of things that are social, and social includes a lot of things. And that's one of the, I mean, we joke, but like sociology is one of those disciplines in social science that includes like, it can include politics, it can include economics, right? That's what we have, like political sociology and economic sociology. And we have like my area of focus, and this is why I think I selected into sociology eventually, is cultural sociology. So I do like organizational and cultural sociology a lot in my research. Religion too, actually, is also a big part of my research. And um, I would say in undergrad at the time, like I took, I majored in political science and economics, and I thought like, oh, okay, like these are kind of like the more, to me, like these were the social science majors I was already naturally interested in, especially political science. Um, and then and then later on, I got into sociology because in undergrad I wanted to write. I just like got interested in social and political theory stuff. Like I read Max Weber like early on in undergrad on my own after a professor mentioned a book of his in class, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. So then I looked it up, and like, I read like Adam Smith, like and like some other things. And then I was just like, oh, so I think from there, like I kind of did a little bit more of my own research. And then my senior year, I did a thesis where I looked at I was kind of like asking and trying to answer a bit of the question, like how does how does religion and culture um, impact business making decisions in
Oh,
China? And I actually specifically I looked at a group of Christian executives in China from the city of Wenzhou. So a lot of these people are like businessmen who then grew their companies into very large companies in
wow.
Wenzhou. And Wenzhou is one of those cities in China that actually is known for a couple things. Early on in China's like economic development, it was considered kind of like a model for economic development. And I was interested in kind of this link between, like Wenzhou is also known as a city with like probably one of the highest percentages for with its Christian population.
Oh.
So
Mhm.
again, this is like a little bit linked to Max Weber's like Protestant ethics, theory of capitalism. But I was just kind of like, I was just like my interest, my curiosity was piqued. So I was just like,
Mhm.
oh, like, is there this connection, between like religion and culture and political economy? So I think that's kind of how I got into sociology from
Wow.
there. And
That's
then
so so you were in China, like you went to China to do your research,
yeah, I
right?
actually in my senior year, I had a chance to go to China to actually conduct some research there. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience, and I was able to from there then um, move towards graduate school. So
Wow.
that's actually what brought me into the PhD program eventually. And who would have thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think, my background is more engineering and science. So when you say research,
Yeah,
I'm thinking, numbers and data. But I'm kind of
right.
curious, for sociology research, like, what does that mean? Does that mean like interviewing
Yeah.
people? Like, does that mean like how do you quantify some of that?
Right. Yeah. So to answer, yeah, I mean, so to answer that question, to use the question that I was asking, right? Like,
Mm.
how does like religion and culture like impact business making decisions, right? And the reason, and what motivated this question is because at the time, China, even more so, was known for just like rampant corruption, right?
Oh,
Systemic corruption across, like, I'm sure you know this too, like, because you're familiar with China.
yeah,
And
a little
um,
bit. No,
yeah, oh yeah,
I left when I was 9, so
oh, okay, yeah, I mean, but that's
but
true.
I understand. Yeah, definitely. I mean,
But
it's like
yeah,
a lot
yeah,
of the, the backdoor kind of stuff.
yeah, like, bribery, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of businessmen have to, like, know, like, it's just a very common practice, like, I think,
Mhm.
for business and government, like, uh, collusion, with
Mhm.
bribes and like a lot of like other under, like just kind of under the, well, not even under the table. I think at that point it was just very overt, like over
Very
the
big,
table stuff.
very blatant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
very blatant. Yeah, so not even subtle. Yeah, so I think I was curious. I was like, for these Christian businessmen, I was like, what kind of, this poses some ethical dilemmas for them, right? And it's like, how do they reconcile that, like, with some of their newfound belief systems? Because religion, like Christianity as a religion, was also just starting to grow more, like, I think, post 1980s in China. So yeah, it was like around that time, right? And I was curious, like, yeah, does this impact them at all? Does this like make a difference, like, in their business making decisions? Like, and I think the answer I found from interviewing people, so that's the way of conducting research in this case. I mean, social science research can be quantitative, so can be, as you say, like, very much dealing with numbers, and you can use like surveys, right? And like, um you can say, like, oh, out of this survey and like this data pool of like 10,000 people, I got like these, results, right? But with interviewing, it's like you can interview, like, some people, like, you can interview anywhere between like 30 200 people or so, and that kind of becomes your data set, so to speak. But these are like in-depth interviews, right? Whereas survey questions are much more just like, kind of like, okay, what is your age, what is your gender, what's your race, and like, what's your household income, and like they ask like a lot of, it's just a little bit more like black and white questions. But with in-depth interviews, it's a little bit more like, kind of like what we're doing, like, this is an in-depth interview, like, so this is like, you get to kind of hear more like rich details and like stories and things. So I think for answering that question, like, hearing people's stories was particularly interesting, because you get like a lot of different people sharing their experiences and stories of like, you know, like, this is a time where I felt like I morally failed, and they were sharing like those kinds of experiences with me. Or people were sharing like, oh yeah, like, I have other ways of like not dealing, like, just to like not deal with government, like, because I don't want to get involved in bribery. They're like, I have other methods of like getting around this like business complexity, right? So yeah, so you get to hear like stories like that, which is, really, to me, is, I thought it was really
With
fascinating.
you, like even like did you have problems like finding people to interview? Like they were pretty willing to be interviewed?
Yeah, I was really fortunate because I did know some people through relatives, who go to China from time to time, and they made trips, and they definitely knew churches and people like in different cities in China. So that's how they made some of those initial contacts for me. So I was really thankful, yeah, just that they were able to make some of those initial introductions for me, because I think if I had not had those introductions, yes, the accessibility to this kind of data would be much, much harder, especially when you're asking questions like, yeah, like, so have you ever taken a bribe?
Yeah, like that's what I was thinking. Like, do you really want to,
Yeah,
be public
yeah,
about that?
Right, exactly. But I think because we had a trusted mutual connection that they knew really well and they trusted and they knew like, oh, she is like, the niece of this person or that I know,
Right.
or she is, the good friend of this person that I know from this church, So in that case, I think it made it like more the Chinese term is like 亲切, right? So
Right, right, and also connected, right? Like 关系,
yeah,
like
yeah,
it's interesting.
right.
Like you're studying that, but you're also sort of like using that like cultural structure to actually get access to
Yes.
these people.
Exactly. Yeah. When we talk about, yeah, it's so interesting when we use the term 关系in
Mhm.
like in research. I feel like there's always a very negative connotation with the word 关系in social
Yeah,
in Western scholarship when we talk about it. But actually, if you directly translate it, it just means like relationship, right, and
right.
network.
Mhm.
And yes, like I think a lot of times it's used in the context of like, oh, people are using this relationship or network to like bribe someone or to like extort a bribe from someone. But i
Or to
think
get
i
like
think
an
yeah,
unfair advantage or something, right?
right, exactly, some kind of favor, right, exactly, yeah. But in this case it's kind of like it's like a, hey, are you willing to like make an introduction for me so I can interview you, which in social science is like very very common. We call it like the snowball method in research.
Oh,
So yeah, so it's like a lot of times in social science, like a lot of researchers will, after they interview someone, they'll say like, oh, like, thank you so much for your time. Like, is there anyone that or if they've brought up someone in the conversation, you could say like, oh, would you mind making an introduction to that person for me? And a
right.
lot of times people would say yes. And they'll be like, yeah, sure. I'll make the introduction.
Yeah,
So yeah, so that's like a method of research in
yeah. I'm
social
just thinking about networking and like, I mean, like that happens everywhere, right? Like in the US, like even maybe
yeah.
we don't talk about it as much, but getting a job, like
Yep.
getting a promotion or whatever, like
Oh,
the network is
definitely.
extremely important, but we don't call
Oh,
it
for sure.
plenty, we don't call it
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
in
And,
that
and
kind of
it's
light.
so it's so ironic and so funny sometimes how like Americans don't see that same kind of thing operating. But because I think, and the reason is because I think in America things are a little bit more subtle and under the table. They don't make it as out in the open.
Mhm.
Whereas like in China, I think sometimes it is much more blatant and out in the
Like
open.
here's the bribe.
Um,
Who wants to pay this bribe?
Exactly, right. It's a little bit more like, all right, here it is, like
Right.
let's just be direct about it, But in America, here things are a little bit more like, oh, let's do this diplomatically, it can be very fake and superficial. So
Yeah.
but you're totally right. Sociologists have studied this too. I'm thinking of this one sociologist, like I mean, yeah, definitely like economists, sociologists, they have all talked about, there's like studies out there that show when you go through like networks, right, or like when you signal certain like cultural capital, like in your resume, for example, if you say like, oh, I went to Harvard and I played water polo, right, for
Mhm.
example, there was some like Niebuhr study that, like, I think this is one of the examples in there, but I remember reading in some article. But it shows that, like, you are of a certain socioeconomic status and level, right, if you were playing water polo in high school at some private club, right? That means like, that's already a signal to the employer when they see that on your resume of like, oh, this person's family is of a certain social status. And like,
Yeah.
and
So it's
and that's
privilege,
not something, it's
right?
not right, exactly. And that's not something we openly talk about in America, but social scientists have to some extent explored some of that. So that's
Wow,
anyway.
that's amazing. So you were in China for a number of years and then you came back?
Well, in my senior year, no, but for the PhD, yes, I spent like about a little over 2 years in China for research. I would say cumulatively it's like over 2 years. But yeah, every summer of my PhD, I went back to China. So
Oh, okay.
starting from 2015 through 2019, like I spent time in China like every year. So
Wow. So what are some of
yeah,
your thoughts of China? Because like you went there as an adult, like you didn't really grow up in
yeah,
Taiwan or China. I know your
right,
parents are from Taiwan, but like what
right.
was there like cultural shock or like did you feel like it was fun to be there or what were some of the, like did you have to make adjustments?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think the biggest adjustment initially was just like the air pollution. That was that was like because I was in Beijing. I
Right.
was in Beijing in from 2015 summer, 2016, 2017. And I think yeah, I think the air pollution in Beijing was is still pretty bad at times. So back then, yeah, for sure. I think that was the biggest adjustment.
Mm.
But I think yeah, it was a really it was so fascinating to be there. You know, I actually mentioned this on like a Clubhouse conversation one time when we were talking about actually we were talking about the Uyghurs issue, like human
Mm.
rights issues in China that time. And I brought in this comment because I felt a lot of times in discussions around US China, I think there's a very like um I would say like there's two very extreme views, you know, and I think I wanted to kind of bring both of those out because I think a lot of times when people deal with contradictions, it's hard to wrap their heads around, you know, like I think when we watch movies, we like to have like this is the good guy and this is the bad guy, like very clearly
Very
delineated, right?
clear. Yeah.
But right, but I think a lot of things in life are just very gray, and China is like that too. so so you know, the people in China are wonderful. Like I met a lot of really, really great friends in China. Like they're the people themselves. I mean, if we would just talk about the politics, like at a political level, yeah, there's a lot of like horrible things that could be going on at times. But the people themselves are like, I think a lot of the people I met were wonderful people, and I still have like a lot of really good friends there. Um, I, you know, one of my roommates in Beijing when I was there for research actually is originally from Ukraine. So like she grew up in Ukraine. She speaks like she speaks like Russian, like, you know, Ukrainian and English and like Chinese as well
Wow.
fluently. Yeah, I'm just like amazed. But like she actually can like come across as like a native Chinese, like, you know, like on the phone. So
Oh,
like some
wow.
person, yeah, yeah. But anyway, so experiences like that, I mean, it was just really fascinating to be in Beijing, especially around I think around that period because I was studying tech and startups and entrepreneurship in China around that time. So it was really interesting to see how the government and the state like supports that effort and, you know, actually like actively encourages it, and they create a space for entrepreneurship and, you know, startups to happen, but then they like can also just as quickly like regulate things, right? And
Mhm.
and that kind of regulatory authority is something that like just in an authoritarian state you can do things that way, right? It's like today, okay, yes, it's okay, the next day it's like no, everything is shut down, you know. That happens in China, and that's just
Right.
how it is. Yeah. You know, getting used to like using a VPN constantly in China was also something I had to like get adjusted to, you know, to get over the firewall. But if you have a decent VPN, then yeah, you actually can, you know, still get on the things that you need to get on if you want to get access to sources. Um, and yeah, in terms of like food, yeah, there's just like there's so much good food in China. Like I think it was one of our uncles, it was Jonathan. I mean, you know, our cousin Jonathan. It
Yeah.
was Jonathan's dad who said like, yeah, he's like, you know, Chinese people, he's like, they spent like 2000 years like not fighting any wars and just like coming up with like recipes
The best
and
food.
like yeah, and coming up with like food. They're just like busy cooking. They're not like fighting wars. So I was like, that's actually not untrue. Like when you spend time in China and you see like the breadth of cuisines that are there, it's like what we see here in the States, the kind of Chinese cuisine we see here in the States,
It's
it's just
such
like
a small
it's
sliver.
just such a small, yeah, it's a very small sliver. It's just a very small percentage of like the range of cuisines that are actually Chinese cuisines. So yeah, it's really, really cool to like, I mean, the food scene in China is also just like really, really cool and really
Yeah,
interesting.
it's
So
a bit ridiculous even, right? Because even now, like a lot of those cities are very international. So they have not just
yeah,
Chinese cuisine, but like everything. So you're making me
yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. Oh, it's true. It's true. Yeah, when I lived in Beijing, actually, like I felt like there were so many things like, you know, that I could still like for burgers, for example, there were like really, really high-end burger joints like in China. There were like I think one friend and I, she's from New Zealand, or actually, no, sorry. She grew up in Brunei and then she went to school in New Zealand and then worked in the UK. She and I like explored one time we went through a list of like top 10 burger joints in Beijing. And and we are like, okay, let's pick out like our top three that we want to visit. And then we like went to those three places in one day and just like tried different burgers from there. So it was, yeah, so it was like things like that, like you can, that's very common and popular in Beijing. So
That's
yeah,
amazing.
so
I want
yeah, so
to
Beijing
talk about.
Beijing has changed so much. So yeah, go ahead.
No, that's
We can
great. I mean,
continue.
I only go back like every few years, and since like I was little, and every time I go back, it's like, what? I get so
Yeah,
curious, and I'm like, I don't know where I'm at.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, where so much has changed. I mean, where did you grow up in
I grew up
China?
in Tianjin, so it's like, it's about like an hour away from Beijing.
Yeah, 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 that's super
I
close.
had relatives
Yeah,
there as well. So, but yeah, it's a
yeah.
bit overwhelming because like now, like we kind of, you and I, like we're both sort of like suburban, like US kind of people. So like when I go to a big city, I'm just like, whoa, I don't know what to do. Like it takes a
Yeah.
while to get adjusted.
It can. I mean, I will say, like, even though I grew up in the suburbs, I don't know if it's just a personality thing. I think I've always been pretty open to new environments and
Yeah.
contexts. So I think a lot of my Chinese friends did say, like, Grace, I'm surprised at how quickly you've adjusted. I was like,
I think it's the food.
but
It's like you're attracted by the food and you're like, I'm there. It's good.
oh yeah, yeah, maybe, yeah, probably that too. I think so. I think so. Yeah, I think I'm the kind of person where I'm like, oh, okay, as long as there's like good food, I can still get Wi-Fi and like,
Yeah, it's
and I
like
have,
basic
and
needs
I
in
have,
life.
right, and I have like friends that that I love and people I'm close to that are around, and like, yeah,
Yeah.
I think I'll be okay.
Awesome. It sounds like such a great place to meet cool people, just like you mentioned, like
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Beijing is one of those cities you meet so many, I mean, expats from all over, right? And then I mean, you get a mixture. It's like you get expats, you get migrant workers, right? You get local Beijingers and people even, it's so like Beijing is similar to New York in the sense that people who did not grow up in Beijing but moved to Beijing later on for school or for work and then settled in Beijing, they like after like I don't know 10 plus years or something, they consider themselves Beijingers, right?
right?
But even if they originally were not from Beijing. But yeah, I think that's what happens like a lot. And I've heard this saying too about Beijing as a city. They've said like Beijing is not like Shanghai or like Hong Kong where like it's one of those kind of like you fall in love at first sight type of cities.
Mm.
Beijing is kind of like one of those like you don't necessarily feel attracted or like the city much at first, but then it's like in Chinese we use the phrase "qi shui changliu,"
Oh, like it
it's like
grows on you, right?
it grows on you. It really Beijing really is one of those cities. It totally grows on you, and you actually like the more time you spend there. Like a lot of people have said, like the more they love it and like miss it when they're not there. So yeah, I think based on my personal experience, I would say like, yeah, Beijing does have that quality to it. So it's a really interesting city because it's also like I've also told people back here when I've talked about like different cities, just comparing. It's unlike a lot of other cities in that here in the States, right? We have New York, we have Washington D.C., we have like Silicon Valley, San Francisco, right? And those are all like major centers in and of themselves. Oh,
Mhm.
and Boston, of course, right? And like just for example, but Beijing is interesting in that it combines qualities of all those cities that I just named.
Oh, that's
It
true.
combines New York, it
Yeah,
combines like DC because it's like the center of power, right? It's
right.
like a lot of financial, like a lot of so much financial capital is in Beijing.
But also technology,
Um,
right? Like Silicon.
Technology is all in, yeah, so much of it high because and it's also like Boston in that like all these universities are there too. Like so all the top universities in China are in Beijing.
That's
So
really
it's like it's a
it's like all mushed into one.
yeah, it's all mushed into one. So yeah, so that's what makes Beijing such an interesting city to study and actually to live in, Um, but of course, like there are things just like that day when I was speaking in the clubhouse room, like to, on the Uyghurs issue, I was like, China is definitely one of those places, and as is Beijing, that very much has two sides to it, right? Like if you're not on the blacklist in China, like you can really enjoy your life there. Like you'll be fine. You know, they'll treat you well, especially if you're an expat. Like you're definitely coming in with a level of privilege, right?
See.
So they treat you better, right, so to speak.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, does China and Beijing have a nasty side? Yeah, absolutely. You know, like I think, you know, if you are on the blacklist, you know, then you'll get thrown in jail. You know, it's like
Wow.
a
Mhm.
and like startup CEOs and entrepreneurs I've talked to, even venture capitalists I've talked to, have said, yeah, you know, like we're used to CEOs like being put under house arrest, you know,
Wow.
like it's no big deal, like it just happens, you know. So and same thing with same thing with pastors, right? Like, you know,
Mhm.
this like that's like so at one point I also studied like underground house churches and like
Wow.
yeah, same thing with pastors, right? Pastors also get put under house arrest or get thrown into prison like all the time, right?
Yeah.
Because the government like you know the central state like the CCP like does not tolerate like any rival to its power, right? If you're a civic organization that is growing too great an influence, or if you're an entrepreneur that, you know, like Jack Ma, who's also like grown too great an influence, then
Yeah.
yeah, the government at some point
Flash
will be
you.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, you know, smack, not just a smack on the hand, like something more than that too.
Wow.
But yeah.
Amazing.
But yeah, so that's the reality of China. It's like it has like it's kind of, you know, two very extreme sides to it in a way.
Yeah.
Um,
I have two like really burning questions. I know you
yeah,
have something, in a little bit, so I'll ask both questions and maybe
yeah,
you
yeah,
can choose
sure.
how you want
Yeah,
to
yeah, it's
answer
fine.
maybe both or, pick one that you like. So I'm curious, just like very personally motivated because you grew up here, but like you kept your Chinese really well, or another way to say, you learned Chinese, as a kid in the US and
Yeah,
you went to China and had to use your language. So I want to
right.
know your secret, or did you always feel like you were okay with learning the Chinese, or like did you have that period? A lot of like Chinese Americans are like, oh, I don't want to learn it, like Chinese school, all that.
Yeah,
I want to know your secret, how you
yeah,
kind of kept that.
yeah,
The
yeah.
other part I
Oh
wanted to
yeah,
ask,
sure.
yeah, I know,
Yeah,
sorry, I
I think
brought
there's
these
a
two
few.
questions that like that are
Oh no,
very
no, no,
like
no.
not related to each other, but
No, 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 no,
so
not
like
at all, not
the
at all.
question
It's a
is
good.
like talking like I know you're interested in politics, right? And
Yeah,
Asian American politics especially, and how to and I'm personally as well, interested in how to get more
yeah.
Americans more involved in politics, whether it's voting or donating or um, running
Public
for
office.
elected positions. So I want to hear,
Yeah.
your thoughts on that and how, people can get more involved and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
different
absolutely, for
questions, but
sure.
you take it away.
No, 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 sure, sure. Yeah, both are like really great questions. I think on the first one, I have a few theories as to why I've kept my Chinese up. I think, I think one, I've always naturally been more of a language person than a numbers person, so that's one. So I think like picking up language has always been a little easier for me in a way, but I don't know. I don't know. So for some reason with Chinese, like I actually didn't really attend Chinese school. Like I only attended maybe like 2 years of Chinese school and then I stopped attending. But I know a lot of kids that I grew up with, they attended like all 8 years of Chinese school or something, you know. But I think what really helped me pick up some of my Chinese again too was also in middle school when I homeschooled for about like 3 years.
Oh,
And yeah, so I actually homeschooled in junior high. And during that time, I mean, I did go back to Taiwan a couple times. So like I think I spent like a couple months in Taiwan, like maybe in seventh and eighth grade. I also started watching, this is like a funny thing, but like I started watching Asian dramas, like
oh yeah, that's
Korean.
definitely how
Yeah,
I
so
kept my Chinese as well.
yeah, yeah, it really helps. I mean, people learn language through watching TV. It's really a thing, you know? Like I have friends from China who learned English through watching American, like, you know, American TV shows. So I think that's actually a big part of it too. I think like, you know, watching Asian shows with my parents like also helped me keep
Because
up
you're
my like
motivated.
help
You're
me.
like, I want to know what happened, so I have to know the
Yeah,
language.
yeah, or I was interested, yeah, and exactly, and then I think in because, like, actually, there was a period from, I would say, 1st grade through 5th grade, I didn't speak any Chinese, like, I just, like, kind
Oh,
of just, like probably because in school, right, you know, everyone's, like, speaking English, so you just like, you know, acclimate, right? You just speak English. But in middle school, when I did homeschool for a period like that, I, you know, definitely was like speaking to my mother a lot at home, right? And then, you know, spending some time in Taiwan, you know, watching like shows with my parents. So I think that combined all helped a little bit. And then I think another thing, in undergrad, I did take like a couple years of Chinese, but again, it wasn't like full 4 years. I know I kind of wish now that I did, because I feel like some of my reading and writing levels would be like better if I had taken the full 4 years. But then in graduate school, actually, at the time, Princeton still required us to take like a language, like some language program. So I actually took a summer at Tsinghua in Beijing, like just to focus on Chinese. So that helps too, I think. So all those things
Awesome.
combined. Yeah. And then I think the second the second question as to like how Asian Americans can be getting more involved. Um, yeah, this is a question I've asked myself too this past year, because I actively wanted to become more involved. So I just started asking around. And maybe this is my approach to research as well. I like to talk to people like you. So I just, you know, started asking people around me if they knew people who were involved in local politics. And actually a lot of the people I started reaching out to were women and men of color, people of color. And these are like I spoke to like a Latinx like activist, you know, I spoke to a Vietnamese activist, you know, I spoke to like Chinese American like local politicians in New Jersey. And like just through those networks, like I started to get to know a few people. And then just like from there, at least right now, like I'm starting to just be like a little bit more involved in like local civic like activities and civic life. So and then actually through Clubhouse, that's actually also one of the reasons I joined Clubhouse. I wanted to just connect to activists and people on the platform. So I was fortunate to have, you know, our cousin John, he like introduced a couple people he knew to me, and then from there I kind of like then got to know other people. So I would say that's just, I mean, I'm just sharing my example, but that's like kind of like one way to just like, you know, network, right? And like get to know people, and then through there like just you kind of naturally, organically like hear of opportunities to get involved in different things. So yeah, so for example, like one thing that came up was this past year, someone invited me to join a panel discussion. And this was like this was one of the first kinds of panel discussions I think that has ever happened that I've heard about in this area, where we brought together Black and Asian activists, you know, to talk about just kind of like how the two communities can be working together better to be advancing like, you know, social justice, right? And all these other things that are going on. So that's one example. I mean, I think there's a lot of, I mean, there's so many nonprofits out there, you know. I think of organizations like the ones like Stacey Abrams built, you know, in Georgia. Um, and yeah, there are things like that where I think you can get. Oh, actually earlier this year I also did like volunteer to help a bit with like a voter turnout. So like there's definitely things like that we can just get involved in with, like, especially because, you know, voter suppression is a real thing, right? So we can do our part like through like getting involved in local like voting turnout like drives, right? Just to like help get the vote out, and just to encourage people to register early, or to like teach them how to do these things, or yeah, just to like, you know, kind of like what Stacey Abrams did, right? Get as many people registered as possible so
Yeah.
that they're actually able to like vote. So I think things like that are all really great opportunities. In terms of on another part of your question, like running for public office, yeah, I think this is one of those things that, especially for Asian Americans, I would say historically and traditionally, it's been really hard for us to break into. And I've asked people this question. I'm like, why is it that we have so little Asian American representation in politics? Um, I don't feel like I've gotten a really sufficient or satisfactory answer to that question yet. Um, my I mean, we're talking about it now, right? With like the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. But I think one of the things that Asian Americans perhaps have unwittingly internalized is just like, we've gotten used to being like invisible, like made invisible, right? And I think in some ways people have accepted that, and they're like, okay, like I'm I'll get what I can, so to speak, like in just like, and I just want to survive. There's a bit of like this I'm just going to survive kind of mentality. And I don't want to like rock the boat, right? I think that's another kind of mentality a lot of Asian Americans have. So when it comes to running for public office, it's like, there's like another Chinese saying, right, that says like, oh, don't be like that tree that like sticks out among all the other trees,
Mm.
right? So, and I think that is very much like an Asian mindset, because growing up, I'm sure you've heard this too, like growing up, right? Like, did your parents ever ask you or tell you like, hey, 不要出风头, like don't like be too obvious, don't
Right.
be like this like Asian modesty, right? And Asian humility that's oftentimes like emphasized to us through our
It's
parents.
like the modesty
Um,
part, but it's also like keeping yourself safe as well,
yes,
like that
yes.
part as well.
Yeah, yeah, both. Right, both and. I agree. Yeah, and so that's something my mother always said to me growing up. She's like,
Mm.
don't be like the 出风头 person, like just
Uh-huh.
like the yeah, And, and I think in some ways like I probably internalized that to some
Mm.
extent. But on the other hand, I think for me like the interest or the passion for public service has always been like part of me. I'd say it's just kind of maybe hardwired. So I know that goes against like I knew that went against like some of what she was telling me to do, but I was like, well, like I think there's a difference between like genuinely wanting to like serve, right, in a role that where you are like in touch with a lot of people in like different sectors of the public. And there's yeah, and I think that's like something that just is required, right? You have to be in a sense like out there, right? You have to be okay to be out there. So at least with my personality, I think I've always been like, maybe I lean a little bit more extrovert in some ways, so I'm like okay with that. But not, yeah. On the other hand, too, I think as I've gotten older, I've also become more introverted. But yeah, but I don't know. I am very much for like Asian American. Like I'm always like when I saw like Andrew Yang run, like
Mhm.
I was really happy to see like an Asian American running for public office. Even, and I remember like growing up, I saw like what is it, Bobby Jindal, who was like in the Republican Party, like this is like a South Asian, like Indian American, right, who ran for public office. Also in the Republican Party, Nikki Haley, and now our Vice President Kamala Harris, right?
Right.
She's like part Indian and the part Black, right? So we're starting to get some Asian representation. But yeah, I have noticed like especially among like East Asians, like whether it's like Chinese, Korean, Taiwanese, like there's not as much of some of that representation. Like we've had a couple senators. We have one senator right now. They're usually from Hawaii, where it's like over 50% Asian, I think. So yeah. Actually, there's a representative in New Jersey, a U.S. a congressman, his name is Andy Kim,
Mhm.
and actually, I think he's an interesting example because his district is actually not very very Asian. It's actually like I think, and he has actually quite a bit of like Trump supporters, but he's a in his district, but he's a Democrat. I actually like. I mean, I wanted to ask like your thoughts too, just like on being a mother and like balancing like all these different things like motherhood and like you've also like run for public office, right, like as a board of education member, right, was it?
Right. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I just
yeah, and like
I'm into my second term, so very excited.
awesome, congrats.
I mean, I don't know, like I feel like I'm very fortunate. Like when I worked as an engineer for several years, I was actually part-time. So my employer was very understanding in that. I think it was like
Oh, that's
six
good.
years that I worked was like half
Yeah.
time, so it was like 20 hours a week.
Wow.
Very, very nice to be able to do that, like get away from the kids for a
Yeah.
time, but also be there for them. As
Yes.
I'm not like always just
Yeah.
at work.
Right.
And then,
Right.
like Paul, like he works, so thankfully, like he provides, for most of the family needs, so I don't have to worry about like, oh, I have to go find a job, so I can
Right. Right.
do more of like the volunteering and do more with the school
Yeah.
kids. And I mean, it
Yeah.
definitely has its days, like it has its moments with craziness, right?
Of course.
But I feel I'm very fortunate to be able to do that, because I think, like you said, you're going back to the kind of the social capital, or like the cultural capital, is that
Yeah.
as a, I guess, like I consider myself sort of like one and a half generation, because I
Yeah.
feel like more American. I mean, I've definitely been in the US more years than I have been in
Yeah.
China, right? So
Right.
I feel like, as I have more advantage compared to my parents, who immigrated, when they're like in their 30s or 40s, and they didn't
Right.
have that, social capital, or the,
Right.
the knowledge of the place. So I feel like
Right.
I've I've been given a lot, even just at the starting point. So that has
Yeah.
made a big difference. I also definitely feel like,
Definitely.
for first generation immigrants, like a lot of my friends or people who are around me, it's harder for them to consider running for public office, or doing volunteering in the community, or just
Mm.
kind of going out of their comfort zone, because they're still like sort of in that survival mode, or that
Mm.
adjusting to the place mode, even if they've been here for a number of years, like 10, 20,
Yeah.
30 years. I think it's still
Yeah.
hard for them sometimes, like to really feel like, am I accepted here? Am I a foreigner, or am
Right.
I from here? Am I like that identity? Sometimes, like, even if
Right.
they are a citizen, they may not feel like 100%, like ingrained, like kind of accepted into that.
Yeah.
Whereas like
Totally.
I grew up in a high school, very similar to yours, where like I was a few Asian kids and most of my friends were white.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of times, like I felt very white, like I felt like I
Mm.
was, really part of that society. And then in
Yeah.
in the college and workplace, I never really. I mean, yes, like there's definitely been discrimination and prejudice and all that, but on some level, like I also feel like I'm entitled to be an American, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like I feel
Yeah,
like I've
totally.
had
That
enough
makes
history
sense.
in here that, like, I feel like to myself or to other people I can say like I am American, Whereas I think
Right.
for some first generation immigrants who came here like later, it's a little bit harder for them to make that claim.
Yeah. Yeah. I get that. That's really interesting. I'm thinking about some of my friends right now as you share what you just did. Um, yeah. And actually I think something else I forgot to bring up earlier, but I think this probably made some difference for me too. Because I grew up in a Asian American church, or it was like an Asian immigrant church, I think that made a difference too for me socially, because I did have quite a number. I mean, I had some friends who were like from the church, and I think that definitely played a role too in my social life. So, um, yeah, and then going back to high school, like after I had homeschooled for a few years, I think some people were kind of like, "Oh yeah, I remember you," sort of like from before, but from earlier on. But yeah, I think, I mean, actually, something I did in high school, I started this organization called like Citizens of the International Community,
Oh,
and that actually was something early on. Like my vision, at least at that point, for that organization was to like bring people together of different backgrounds, race, ethnicities, and to like work towards like just better cultural understanding, and also and to do projects like for the community together. So we did a combination of like community service projects, like for example, like a book drive for the inner city, and then we also coordinated like a couple like cultural festivals, actually, like for the township. So it was like at the local high school, and it's just like, yeah, bringing people together of like different backgrounds, and to share like their different cultural heritage. So that was, yeah, so that those were things. But I think, yes, like you, like I totally resonate with the I definitely felt like entitled and privileged too, as like a second generation. Like I knew like how much harder like it was for my parents.
Mhm.
And I think in that sense, like I've always been, you know, um yeah, I think I've always just been aware of like how much I've been given, So I think, yeah, I totally resonate with what you just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Well,
I think it's so cool that I think it's so cool that like you're doing like board of education, and you're doing like, I mean, you've done like different like small businesses on the side, like I think that's really, I mean, what are some of the other things that like you're just like doing these days, or like you're interested in right now?
There's a lot of different. I mean,
You did like a marketing thing.
well, these
You did
interviews.
like, you said marketing was something like recently you were involved in, was it?
Yeah, so after I left GE, I actually got
Yeah,
an MBA degree. So I didn't know what I was
nice.
going to do with that. Then somehow, again, like through connections, I was introduced to this like adjunct professor sort of like role. So I started teaching
Yeah,
marketing like a couple years ago at our local
that's
college,
so,
and it's like
wow, that's so great.
online, so it's a lot of fun. I enjoy it.
Yeah,
But so I feel like it's cool because then I can use not just like what I learned from the MBA, but like from those experiences, like working as an engineer in a like corporation, but also
yeah,
a business owner, like
yeah,
of that, like I guess a practical experience, just
yeah,
I made a
yeah,
lot of
definitely.
mistakes, like
Oh,
I'm sure you
definitely.
work with a
Yeah,
lot of like entrepreneurs and you make
yeah,
so many mistakes, as a small business owner, and
yeah,
I just try to bring some of that in the class so that the
yeah.
students are like, okay, kind of learn from other people's mistakes.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's so cool. That's really, really cool. Wow.
It's fun. Um,
That
can
is
I ask
cool.
you about Wellesley? I mean, I didn't go to a
Yeah,
women's college, and I think some of the, racial stuff that we're talking about is some like I know you also posted on Facebook, and I want to explore that as well. But like
yeah,
how race is intertwined with like gender, and like as an Asian woman,
class.
like I'm an Asian woman,
Yeah,
and I think sometimes like there's an extra layer of complexity, and then I
yeah,
know that you on your post you mentioned and how that's also sometimes intertwined with the economic status, right? Like a
yeah,
lot of these like violent events are gonna affect more of the people who are in the inner city, who are in the lower ranks of the economic strata, I guess. So I
yeah.
want to hear more sort of about your experience as an Asian woman, and like what did the women's college like offer that you feel like, advice, or maybe advice for students who are considering like, all women's college or all women's high schools. Um,
Yeah,
I don't
definitely.
know. Sorry, it's not really a question. It's just like a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, no, no. I hear that. I can kind of go like a bit by bit. So I think on the first question about like how race, class, and gender are intertwined. Yeah, and for example, like you and I, we both are Asian American women, right? So we can say like we are both women of color, right, so to speak.
Mhm.
And I think only recently, and this is what I appreciate about like the recent movement, is that I think Asian Americans are finally getting recognized, in the fabric of American society. Because frankly speaking, in undergrad, I remember taking this American politics course, and I remember like asking my professor at Wellesley, like, hey, like, why aren't Asians mentioned in this survey data? And she was just like, oh, like, well, they are, like they're included under the others category or something. And I was just like, oh, awkward, like, oh, like a bit sweat drop. And I was like, okay, I guess we're not a category. We're
Okay,
not even
you're just
important.
other.
We're not, yeah, we're not important enough for like social scientists to even take notice.
Wow.
Yeah, but that's honestly like how you feel sometimes, right, as an Asian American. But anyway, that's more along the racial identity part.
Right.
But yeah, I think for both of us, right, like we also grew up in I mean, I grew up in a suburban, like farm town-ish kind of area.
Mhm.
So it wasn't like a super rich town, but it also wasn't. So it was very much like a middle class, like kind of town, right? And I think I recognize like the environment in which I grew up in is definitely not going to be the same as, you know, kids I taught in Baltimore, right? Who are growing up like in the, inner city, right? That's a very like that's still like definitely like a very significant class difference, right? Um, I've had students of color at Princeton who, you know, like um like a Black student, for example, whose father is actually you know, very, very has been very, very successful, like career wise, like in the financial sector. And that, I would say like that's another example of where like class and race intersect, right? So I'm sure like as a Black man, right, like there are experiences that like you definitely like still like experience are for sure like discriminatory no matter what, right, in spite of class, right? But then on the other hand, a Black man who grew up with, a family in like a much, in a very, very like wealthy neighborhood versus a Black man who grew up in the inner city is going to have like vastly different experiences, right, of like racial violence, for example. So that I think that's kind of why, and even for example, a white man who is like, we talk about a lot of like Trump supporters these days are rural white working class voters who were pretty much left, just like without jobs, right, after like in a post-industrial America,
Mhm.
right? Whereas in the past, like many of them could survive really well with like the jobs that they had, when all these like, automobile companies, right, were like hiring people for like, factories and plants and things. So that's like all gone right these days. And I think so. So when I wrote what I did in my post, I was thinking about like all these factors at play, right? Because I think a lot of times the attention is just purely on white supremacy, right? Dismantling white supremacy. And I'm arguing that like, and actually I didn't make it as like apparent in this post. I'm probably going to write a follow-up post actually. But I really want to say, I think what I really want to say, and this is probably what I'll write about in my next, and like as when I edit it in this next post is, um, yes, we need to dismantle white supremacy, but I think even beyond white supremacy, right? I think we need to look at who are like the wealthiest and most powerful people in our country,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of times these people can maybe like they're very good at virtue signaling, right? They can like give an outward show of support for Black Lives Matter or like for the Me Too movement or for like Stop Asian Hate, right? But when it comes to making concrete policy changes that will actually help these people, right, in the inner city or in like rural America, it's like nothing is actually changing. Like we're like, to me, it's like I'm like, I don't want your symbolic shows of like, oh yeah, we're nominating like Asian directors this year at the Oscars. Oh yeah, like great. We have all these Black actors now who won like Oscars, right? It's that to me is like that's symbolic. And I'm not saying like those aren't significant at all, but like I don't like I'm kind of like I'm a little bit fed up with just like these symbolic shows of like,
Right.
oh yeah, we're supporting you, but it's not actual like concrete change,
Mhm.
like for the people who need it most, right? So I think that's why when I say like when we think about like race and class, right, and gender, like all these things intertwined, like I think we need to consider like who are the people in power. I mean, people also like are targeting like a police brutality, right, and like the police system. And I want to ask the question like who installed and instituted these systems of policing, right, in these like prison systems. It's not the poorest, right, white people like who we call white supremacists these days, right? It's the richest and wealthiest and most powerful people in our society who are of a similar race and gender, right? who instituted these systems. They are the gatekeepers, right? So like that's what I think we need to do. Like a lot of that, like we need to speak out and call out that, because that's not getting, I don't think in a lot of the conversations today, like that's not getting called out. Like people just use like the terms like a lot of people just like kind of throw around like, oh, white supremacy, oh, like, like police brutality. And I'm like, and I'm not arguing that those aren't problems, those are problems, but like there are also like at an even wide, like at an even bigger picture level, like there's these other groups that I feel like are still just they're getting away with it, and I'm like, no way, like you can't just get away with these things like scot free and like kind
Yeah.
of give your symbolic shows of support without actually trying to like make concrete changes. Like to me, like that's really superficial and like meaningless. So
Yeah, definitely. And there's a reason that these systems exist, and there's these
yeah,
underlying things that we don't normally see. We see the behavior, we see the impact or the consequences of them, but we don't really see how these systems are built in the first place.
exactly. And maybe because a lot of my research as a sociologist actually has been on the study of elites in
Oh,
society, I
mhm.
think that actually does like influence a lot of my thinking about this too, because I'm like elites are a lot, they are the gatekeepers, right? And if they're not willing to make these concrete changes, nothing is going to change, right? Even if we keep saying like, oh, we need to like, like more policing is not the answer, or like, oh, we need to dismantle like white supremacy, right? And I'm like, yeah, what does that mean? What does that look like? Right. And that means like speaking like to the people in power, right? Or that means also like for people who have to run for public office who are willing to like actually dismantle, like help dismantle some of these systems, right? That have been like put in place. So
Right.
I don't know. I mean, that's why I do appreciate, even though if I cannot say I 100% agree with like politicians like Bernie Sanders or AOC, or, but I think in a lot of ways, I so appreciate how they have spoken up against things like economic inequality, like in our society. I think especially Bernie Sanders, I think he gets a lot of credit for really making this much more of a mainstream issue, because in the past, like, I never heard politicians talk about income inequality or economic inequality.
Right.
So this is something that I think is more or less in the public consciousness now. So
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Wow. So let's wrap
I'm
up.
sorry,
I
that was
know
a
you
really,
have to.
yeah,
Thank you.
I
This is
know.
so great. I'm so love chatting with you. I know you have to go, in a little bit, so I want to sort of wrap up and just give you a chance to say, any final words of advice, maybe for young people who might be interested in politics or sociology or some of those topics that we talked about. Like, how can they get involved, or are there nonprofits that you recommend, for people to look up and contribute to, or donate to, or volunteer?
You know, I have to say, I think a lot of I'm noticing in the younger generation these days, there are so many kids in high school and in college who are using social media platforms as a form as for activism. And I think that already is a way of getting involved. Like I think there are some people who are I see younger people in this generation who are doing that I really appreciate and also admire. And I'm just like, wow, this is great that we have so many people in our generation who care about these issues and who see like the injustices and are so sensitive, to the injustices like in our society. So yeah, I think that's my word of advice. And I think because like social media is like one of those things that I think is very natural to a lot of people in the younger generation.
Yeah.
um but yeah, I think kids like too, it's not too early to also just get involved in like the local township politics, right? Like you can start there, like go to like town hall meetings, right? Like go listen to and I think follow the news, right? Like read a lot of like political analyses. Like I've definitely mentored like high school students like now who's in college, who were very interested in these issues, and they would just like, talk to other. And so I would say like also to younger people, they can talk to other, older people too, just like about about issues of the day, right? And actually, if anything, I think sometimes as I'm seeing in our generation, like when parents talk to, their kids, like me as the kid now, if my like I think parents and us, like we have like there's like a different exchange of views too. And I know sometimes that can be very contentious, but I think it can also be like really helpful for growth, like on both sides, just in terms of like better understanding people of very different views. So yeah, so I would say like I think another word of advice is like don't be afraid to engage with people who have very different views from yourself. I think one of the ways to really grow intellectually, spiritually, and just like become a more emotionally mature person is to be willing to engage with people who are from very different backgrounds than yourself, right? Whether that be again like on race, class, gender, right? So like, you know, I have no qualms at all speaking to like a Trump voter. Like I want to be able to talk to someone who voted for Trump and like have a conversation and understand like what their hardships are, you know, and like why they would vote for Trump, even if we may have like very different conclusions, right? I know some people may not agree with me. I think some activists these days they would say like, oh yeah, we don't want to waste time like talking or engaging with people with such radically different views. It's just not even possible to persuade anyone. But I think, you know, as because I've also known like very conservative people throughout my like in my life, like growing up, I think I've gotten more used to engaging with people with very different views than myself. So yeah, I would say like don't let's not be threatened by difference. You know, like I hope that doesn't divide us as a society. So
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that because, it seems like the past few years we've lost the ability to agree to disagree or to listen to different points of view, and that's definitely something
yeah.
that we need to learn to do again.
Yes, yes, I very much feel that. I'm glad you're I'm glad you agree. That's something that's been on my heart for a while too, and that worries me actually. So I'm hoping that yeah, we can start moving in a direction again where people are willing to engage and just talk to people of very different stripes, ideological stripes too, you know.
Absolutely.
So yeah, thank you so much,
Yeah,
Jen. This was like really, really fun.
yeah, thank
Yeah,
you. I so appreciate the time with you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this interview. Let me know in the comments below what you liked about this interview, what you agree with, what you maybe disagree with, what was surprising to you. And definitely hit the like button if you enjoyed this and subscribe to this channel for even more fun and interesting interviews coming your way. Thank you and see you soon.